Right now, our first speaker is Dr. Sandra McGuire. She is Professor Emeritus at the University of Tennessee, formerly the Assistant Dean of Nursing at Lincoln Memorial University. She is the author of several scholarly articles on ageism and violence, neglect, and the elderly, articles that have appeared in some of the leading journals in her profession. Today, she'll discuss the aging population demographics and what issues that they're subject to. Welcome, Dr. McGuire.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. I was told that my presentation, Margaret, would be up, the PowerPoint. Oh, step up into the mic. Okay, my presentation hopefully sort of overlaps all the other things that are being talked about today: crime, abuse, mistreatment. And what I'm focusing on, and this is something, a mission, I am retired from the University of Tennessee. I chaired the master's program in nursing and the gerontology concentration. And sort of my mission now in my second retirement is the whole issue of combating ageism and re-imaging aging. So what we are going to start with is just the whole thing. It's supposed to go forward. Oh, okay. These are some aging demographics. I just want us to be careful with aging demographics because oftentimes when we look at aging demographics, people are going, oh wow, look at all the older people. We don't have a population pyramid anymore. It's becoming a rectangle. It could become a hammerhead shark pretty soon. And I think what we need to do is look at aging demographics in a much different way. The people are living longer, healthier lives, and that according to the United Nations, among today's young people, survival to age 80 is expected to be the norm. Now, this is the first time in the history of the world that that has happened. So worldwide, people are now frequently living as many years as an older adult as they did as a child. And so what I think we need to do, instead of looking at these numbers as being scary and what are we going to do with, oh, this aging population, is we need to start looking at this as we have all been given a longevity dividend. You guys, how does this keep going? I'm pressing the forward button. Well, I can continue with, well, they're figuring out why it's, oh, okay. Directed towards back. Okay, well, you guys, I just want to let you know, in 1900, the life expectancy in this country was basically 47 years old. That's about the time that my grandfather was born in 1902. By the year 2000, life expectancy had increased to 77 years old, and that was a gain of 30 years. That is as many years of life expectancy from the Stone Age to 1900. And a child born in this country today, and this is why combating ageism and re-imaging how we look at aging is so important. A child born in this country today has a 50% chance of living to be 100. And I am never going to get this thing. Oh yeah, it did, okay. All right, now one thing, if you guys really want more statistics on there's a profile of older Americans that is printed every year. It is part of the Administration on Aging publishes this. If you guys want more statistics on income, marital status, housing, anything, this is an excellent resource. It's called Profile of Older Americans. It's done by the Administration on Aging. And this is one thing, in a way where ageism sort of comes in. The Administration on Aging used to easily be looked up on the website. Just by itself, typing in Administration on Aging. Nowadays, you have to go to the Administration for Community Living, and things are much more difficult to find that used to be on the AOA website. So it's probably easier if you guys are really interested in finding yearly updates on statistics to just go to that website. And now it turned off. Okay, ageism. This was a term that was originated by Dr. Robert Butler. He was a renowned gerontologist. He was the first director of the National Institute on Aging, and he coined the term ageism as to denote stereotyping and discrimination against people because they are old. And so this term has been out there for a long time. And instead of saying it's time to combat ageism, I really believe it's way past time to combat ageism. And unlike a lot of isms that affect a specific group of people, ageism affects everyone. Everyone in this room, everyone everywhere is aging. The United States is frequently, there has never been a better time to bring attention to the impact of ageism on our society. We should not be a barrier to independence, choice, and control over one's life. It's time to change our perception of aging. That quote there was a study done, it came out in 2016 in Canada called the Rivera Report on Ageism. And in Canada, a country very similar to the US as far as values and culture, said that ageism was the most socially accepted prejudice in that country. And basically, I would think that would probably be the same in this country today. And all of us really need to look at that as something that's really important to change, because that's why we have things with the elder abuse, the neglect, the fraud, the abuse, that ageism plays a really important role in a lot of the things that we're going to be talking about today. And actually, I was asked to address, since this is a Tennessee conference, ageism in Tennessee. A few years back, we did a study on ageism in Tennessee. I had done some work with Dr. Robert Butler. Some of you may be familiar with him. He is the author of the books, a number of books on ageism. And he had done studies on ageism in the US and other countries. And some of us, I was at the University of Tennessee at the time, thought, it can't be the same in East Tennessee. We know East Tennessee, the values, the culture, the family values. And so ageism in East Tennessee, it couldn't be as prevalent as what some of these other studies said. Actually, it turned out to be just as prevalent. We used Dr. Palmar's ageism survey, and participants of the study perceived ageism to be widespread and prevalent. And over 80% responded that they had experienced ageism in some way, which wasn't a statistic that we had expected. Examples included that they were being disrespected, that they were being ignored or not taken seriously, that they were being talked down to or patronized. They were told, you're too old for that. And that reminds me of a story. This was years ago. It was an actual story in Sweden. A fellow, an older fellow, Gustav Eriksson, had decided he wanted to be in a bicycle race with all these other bicyclists. And he went to register, and they told him, Gustav, you're too old. You can't do that. So they wouldn't let him register, but he got out his old bike, and he just ran along the cyclist in the race. And Gustav won the race. And along the way, he started getting a group of folks that followed him, and he was called Super Grandpa. And there's actually a children's book that tells the story of Gustav and winning his race, that he was told he was too old to enter. Jokes and cards, probably all of us, jokes and cards. Birthday cards are probably one of the classic examples of, it's like, once you turn 40 or 50, you're over the hill. Doctor assumed that an ailment was due to my age, and for me, coming from a healthcare background, I've heard people say, they'll say, but you know, my right knee, something's wrong with it. And they'll say, well, you got to remember at your age, but they'll say, yeah, but I have a left knee also, and it's doing just fine. So it's not that everything is because all ailments are not because of age. And assumed I could not hear because of my age. Oh, attitudes about aging have been, and this is why our attitudes, everyone in this room can leave this room today. And if your attitudes about aging become more positive, there are so many good things that can happen from it. Its attitudes about aging have been identified as one of the most important factors in how people age. This started Dykewald and Fowler in their book Age Wave in 1990. Becca Levy and some of the research she's done is actually cited in here in these handouts, that your attitudes about aging play a very significant part in how you age. People who expect to live a downward course in life usually do. If you expect old age is probably going to be pretty terrible for you, it probably will be. So our attitudes play a very important part in how, not only how we age, but our attitudes about the older people around us, and also the policies and programs and different things that our society makes available for older people. And that's the people who expect a downward course in life tend to live accordingly. I think we need to go back one. Individual responses to ageism includes things such as depression, fear of aging, which is gerontophobia, anxiety, feelings of worthlessness, self-deprecation, and even suicidal thoughts. And a lot of people may not be aware, but older adults have one of the highest suicide rates in our whole nation, in all the United States. And older white men have the highest suicide rate in this country. So we know, and yeah, the adjectives. And when you think about it, if you were asked to take out a piece of paper and write down just some adjectives or words that you described older people, and just jot them down, and then someone says, now take out a piece of paper and jot down words that you think describe younger people, you would see a very big difference. And all of us really need to look at how we think about aging and how we actually, and that's where the re-imaging aging comes into place, because we need to start thinking about aging. We need to maximize that longevity dividend, and we need to start looking at aging with optimism rather than the aging with negativity that often happens. Unfortunately, research has consistently shown that people's attitudes are predictors of adverse health outcomes in old age. And over on the Elder Watch table, if some of you are interested, I've put together a handout on some of the research, just the articles that are out there. And so that these negative attitudes are predictors of adverse health outcomes, and the same research has shown, and this impacts on every single one of us in this room, it impacts on everybody, that more positive attitudes about aging help to combat these adverse health outcomes. Older people with positive attitudes about aging, and this is what, I do have some handouts on the Elder Watch table of some of the articles, if anybody was interested in them, on what this research shows. It's largely been done by Becca Levy and her colleagues at Yale, and also the National Institute on Aging and other groups. Older people with positive attitudes about aging. So people can, if you can change your attitudes about aging or look at aging more positively, these are some of the good health outcomes. You have lower prevalence of psychiatric conditions, more resilience when you encounter stressful events, better recovery from disabling events or surgery, or if you're in rehab. They have better memory. They have better balance. And actually, one of the first articles that Dr. Levy published, probably about a decade ago now, showed that people with positive attitudes about aging are living 7.5 years longer than their counterparts who do not. So everybody can leave this room today and decide that you are going to have more positive attitudes about aging and look at aging with optimism, and you have just added 7.5 years onto your life. So, and actually, the research just goes on and on. Ageist attitudes have shown to be a risk factor. So these are some of the things that ageist attitudes can do that are not good for your health. They're a risk factor for cardiovascular events. They negatively impact quality of life in old age, and especially your self-image, because people begin to just believe that all of these myths and stereotypes and all of these things are true. And this one, it's actually, ageist attitudes have been shown to be a predictor of Alzheimer's disease biomarkers. This article by Dr. Levy and her colleagues was given the Gerontological Society of America Award last year. I was presenting at that conference, and Dr. Levy was there. It received the award for the best article of the year from the Gerontological Society of America. And all of us are aware of Alzheimer's disease and the incidence and the prevalence, and the fact that ageist attitudes have now been shown to be a predictor of biomarkers of Alzheimer's disease is important to all of us, is important to everybody. So it's just another really good reason to change our attitudes. Okay, now ageist attitudes are, ageist attitudes, there must be okay, starting with young children, it looked like we skipped some slides. The first one should have been actually individual. Ageist attitudes are prevalent on individual, society, and institutional level. On the individual level, it's what all of us think about aging. And so those attitudes actually become unconscious forces and really impact on how we think about aging. Societal, starting with young children, people have been socialized to the pathology of aging. There have been some textbook studies that have been done in different states just to look at how aging is presented. Usually, if aging is presented at all, it is the pathology of aging that is presented. So all of us have pretty much been socialized into the myths, the stereotypes. Older adults are frequently labeled in negative ways. We become socialized into believing these labels, that these things are true. And as people grow older, we begin to think of ourselves as if the labels that are out there in society are true. And so these attitudes hinder all of us recognizing the potentials of old age and what old age could be for all of us. And when you remember that you probably got as many years living as an older adult as you did as a child, it's time to really maximize the potentials of those years. Societal aspects of aging are age norms. Ageist language is very common, age segregation. And age segregation actually results in a lot of social isolation. And if you think about it, in our society, we are a relatively age-segregated society, and that's something that we really need to change. I like to use the word intergenerate. We really need to intergenerate more. We need to bring the generations together much more than we're doing now. Society, we have all these anti-aging products. You can go around town, there can be anti-aging salons. You don't see anti-children, you don't see anti-adult salons, but you do see a lot of anti-aging, as if it's an unnatural or unwanted part of our lifespan. Greeting cards, TV, all of the things that all of us are pretty aware of. Our societal attitudes in this country have tended to promote a nursing home mentality of aging. And people start thinking of aging in terms of what I like to call the devastating Ds: death, dying, disease, disability, dependency, decline, and dementia. And those are not ways. Those are not synonymous with aging. Most of those things can happen across the lifespan, but that is how, in our society, often we view aging. And then institutional. Ageism affects institutional and governmental policies and decisions, programs, and resources. And when you think about people basically are not educationally, emotionally, or socially prepared for old age. And this can make difference in programs and policies that are out there for older people being sensitive to the needs of programs for older people. Things that happen like, when you have the Older Americans Act come up for reauthorization, and all of a sudden they want to take the nutrition programs out, which are like your Meals on Wheels, your congregate meals, and put them out as a social service block grant. Well, if it's a social service block grant, it might not have to go for those needs of older people that we know really benefit from programs like that. And this came from the United Nations. It is imperative the governments design innovative policies that target the needs of older people, which include housing, employment, healthcare, social problems, and protections. And in an ageist society, a lot of times those things are difficult to achieve. So everyone needs to try to promote more positive attitudes about aging and combat ageism. Ageism is a matter of social justice. So we all, and this whole thing with the Tennessee Elder Justice Conference, ageism is a matter of social justice. And research has raised, as far as mistreatment that's addressed significantly in this conference, that research has raised the issue of elder mistreatment as being inevitable in an ageist society. And that was from the International Longevity Center, which Dr. Robert Butler was actually the director of that center for many years until his passing a couple of years ago. So that, in a way, is sort of a scary thought, that in an ageist society such as ours, we have been described as a very ageist society, that elder mistreatment is inevitable, and that needs to change. Ageist attitudes and social marginalization of older people make them vulnerable to becoming victims of elder mistreatment, and they're often silent victims. Elder mistreatment, as you all know, is very, very under-reported. And even without research, I'm all for research, I've done research, but I think even without research, it just makes common sense that people are less likely to abuse or neglect someone or something that they value. And it's another good reason to combat ageism, is that it's just another way to probably work on all this elder abuse and neglect, the fraud, the crime that we know are evidenced and are being addressed in this conference. So research has consistently shown the existence of ageism. So what we need to do now is, there's enough research out there. We know that ageism exists. It's time to say we don't need to keep doing research to show that it exists. We need research to show how we can combat it. We need to know what are the interventions, what can we do, what can everybody in this room do to combat ageism. Now these slides are going to be posted on the East Tennessee Area Agency on Aging site and on this conference website. So if any of you are interested, there's a lot of research. The first one is the one that came out of Canada. And actually, these pieces of research actually show interventions for what we can do to try to combat this, to try to combat ageism. And then the Frameworks Institute now for the last few years has come out with numerous research publications on looking at ageism and interventions that we can do to combat it. So they're in the slides. I just put them in there so that you would have them as reference and to know that they are out there, because actually some of these references are really difficult to locate. So just in case anyone is interested, that they would have them. Some of the consistently recommended interventions is we all have to be aware. We all have to say, yes, there is ageism. There is ageism out there. We are a very ageist society. Research has consistently shown that. So an awareness of ageism and being able to say that ageism is discrimination and stereotyping against people because they are old. And some people, probably everyone in this room, understands that concept, but there could be people out there that don't, to make sure that people know that there is ageism, it's prevalent, and we need to do something about it. The Canadian study, basically all of those studies recommended these different interventions. We need to be aware, we need to have a self-awareness of our own attitudes about aging. Everyone needs to take a look at what are our attitudes about aging, and Are they very positive or are they very negative? We've already seen the research that shows that these negative attitudes have a lot of adverse health outcomes, but they also have a lot of adverse life outcomes, like elder abuse, neglect, fraud, crime. So it's not just individual health outcomes, it's outcomes that affect us, across society. They also talked about lifespan aging education, because right now people basically are not educationally, socially, or emotionally prepared for old age. How many of us ever in school had somebody talk to us about, this long life ahead of you and how you needed to prepare for it and what you could do as an older person and activities? I had students, I used to teach a class called Aging in Society, and I had students, and this was a college level course. It was an interdisciplinary course, so you could have students from any of, engineering, nursing, social work. A lot of them weren't even aware that we had an administration on aging. A lot of them weren't aware of things like the National Institute on Aging. They were vague about what, they knew the term Medicare, but they really weren't sure what it was. And it's really sort of a shame that in a way that some of this content is not being integrated into education. It's also a shame that research has shown that by the time you can pick up ageist language and children start to speak, you can pick up ageist language. By the time a child is, preschool, you can measure ageist attitudes. And in fact, I've done some research on that, and that the attitudes are there by the time they're in preschool. And that by the time a child is 12 or 13 years old, these attitudes are very difficult to change. And we actually did a research project with some of the high schools, where we went in and did aging fairs. And the teachers loved the aging fairs, the kids loved the aging fairs, our elder heroes and our people who participated loved the aging fairs. And we did a pre and post test, and these would be your kids that you're 12 or 13 years old. And we did a pre and post test, and although everybody loved it, we didn't make a significant change in those kids' attitudes. And my co-researcher was a little disappointed in that. But I said, actually, what we've done is we've reinforced the research that shows if you wait till someone is 12 or 13 years old, with the attitudes that our society has today, it is going to be very hard to change those attitudes, especially with a one-time event. So anyway, we need to get to these attitudes early. Well, now I just clicked it off. So let's see where we're at. Will the slides come back on, you guys? No? All right. There are a couple more points. I wanted to make sure that you remember, we need to think about the longevity dividend. We need to think, I will keep going. We need to think about the longevity dividend. You need to think about aging with optimism. And one thing that I think shows, when we look at institutional ageism and how that's reflected in things like policies and programs, or more importantly, maybe gaps that we have in policies and programs for older adults. And a classic thing for me is I've been involved with some of the senior Olympic athletes here in Knoxville. And years ago, they started what they called the Senior Olympics. Most of you are probably familiar with that. And in about 1990, the U.S. Olympic Committee went to the Senior Olympic people and said, you can't call them Senior Olympics anymore. That's not really what we consider Olympics. Now remember, we have Special Olympics, my family's active with that. We have Paralympics. They said, you can't call that Senior Olympics. It's not, I guess, dignifying our name. So if you go online today, you will find that it's not senior. If you were calling yourself Senior Olympics before they made that mandate, like here in Knoxville, we have our Senior Olympics, and our Smoky Mountain Mamas usually they'll usually win state, they go on to nationals, but it's now, when you look for them, it's under Senior Games. So we weren't allowed to call, if you started a new Senior Olympics program, you call it Senior Games, not Senior Olympics. And to me, there's just some classic examples of, how we view aging in our society. So as far as self-awareness, we all need to evaluate our own attitudes about aging. What are the attitudes that you have? What are your attitudes conveying to others, and especially to children? I mean, what are the attitudes that you're conveying? What attitudes are you reinforcing? When somebody makes an ageist comment, when somebody sends or a joke or a card. So what attitudes are you reinforcing, maybe even unconsciously? Like if you laugh at it or, think, oh, that's pretty cool. We need to strive to convey non-ageist attitudes. We need to refute ageist attitudes when we see them. We need to avoid ageist language. And because we've sort of been socialized into all of these devastating Ds of death, dying, disease, dementia, decline, dependency, we need to be careful not to do that. This is a term that Dykewald envisioned. It was called Elder Within. And I used to have my students do an exercise on Elder Within. And Elder Within makes you look at what is the older person that I want to be, and what do I need to do now to get there. And for me, it was a really interesting experience with the students, and it really made a lot of them think about, I'm going to live to be this older person, and what do I need to do to get there? Since the slides aren't coming up, the one thing we need to be much more intergenerational than we are. And when I think about it, all of these research studies with interventions, all of them said we need to be more intergenerational. When you bring the generations together, it's a win-win situation for everybody. And a lot of these things can be done immediately, at no cost, and with great rewards. Like a lot of you probably, like in your churches, you most likely have an adult choir, you have a youth choir. Why don't we have an intergenerational choir? In Knoxville, we have a symphony orchestra, we have a youth orchestra. Why don't we have an intergenerational orchestra? We are missing everyday opportunities in this community and in this country to bring generations together and to, in that way, combat ageism, promote knowledge and understanding between generations. And we are missing some opportunities that would be so easy for us to do. So, and we need to actually be very careful about our language. All of the studies mentioned the language of ageism and how we promote ageism, and then some of these very negative things that happen with abuse and crime because of ageism. And so we just need to be careful of the adjectives you use. Be careful of the thoughts that you are conveying. Ageist attitudes are contagious. And especially with kids, if you're reading a book to them, like let's say Mr. George Baker, and he's 100 years old, because one of the things I'm into is early children's literature and aging to promote positive attitudes about aging and aging education with children. And Mr. George Baker is sitting on the porch, he's 100 years old, with the little next door neighbor, and they're both going to school. And Mr. George Baker is a skilled musician. And sometimes when he's out on the porch and he'll start singing or something, his wife, who is 90, comes out and dances with him. Now, if you read that book to kids, I mean, you can go, wow, look at, he's 100 years old. You might live to be 100 years old. Look at all the things Mr. Baker is doing. But if you read that book and go, oh, wow, I'm amazed he's still alive and he can move, that is not a good way to present that content. So we need to really look at the attitudes that we are conveying when we do this. One thing at the end, and I know I'm just going to forget about the slides for now. We're just going to go on. One video that I would ask all of you, if you get a chance to please look at, is called Age of Champions. You can just plug it in, you can Google it, it'll come up. I think it's pretty much available free now. I paid for it years ago when it first came out at a conference. But it is the only video I have ever seen on senior Olympic athletes, real senior Olympic athletes competing. And it's such a role model for, I mean, when kids, look at how these senior Olympic athletes that we have in our community, like our Smoky Mountain Mamas, who are a women's senior Olympic basketball team that usually win state and go on to nationals. Look at how these athletes could be utilized as role models in our schools, how kids could be at their senior Olympic events and helping out. And Age of Champions is just a fantastic video. There's a 100-year-old tennis player in there, and there wasn't anybody else in his age group to compete with. So he had to play a younger guy. There was a guy who was 90, and he won. And just the dialogue with the people in these senior Olympic Games, which could give even kids, everybody, it's like, I like to play basketball now. The mamas only do a 3-on-3, they don't do a full court. But it's like, I could do basketball forever. These people could be role models in our schools. We have the Silver Stage Players, a theater group here in Knoxville that's known nationally and does plays and is in Art Age theater publications that probably very few of us in this room even knew existed. And, you know, so I think there's just so many ways that we, on an individual, on a societal, and an institutional level, can work to combat ageism and re-image how all of us view aging. That can help not just every single one of this room, it helps our whole society and creates a generation of people that can look forward to old age, that can age with optimism, and can maximize the longevity dividend that we have all been given. Thank you.